I think it's for two loves and interests of mine. One is, I guess, my father was an artist, and it seemed like all the fun happened before I was born. I would hear about the artist parties and Woodstock and the party after the St. Louis post office mural and all this stuff, and I'd see old pictures so I knew it was true. And so I had this idea of artist parties. I've always been interested in the kind of the interaction between artists and artists having fun and you know, being friends but also being a community. And I also have used performers and performance in my work for a long time. It's been a recurring thing. So you take the happenings and you got it all, because it's the early 60s, downtown New York scene. The happenings were in warehouses, kind of small galleries, informal galleries, and the artists and the performers, I mean, they're right in the same space, and sometimes the audience looks more animated than the performers. You know, it's just kind of great celebration. And I also was fascinated by the feeling of the no performance, you know, like the performances would be so ironic. They very frequently, you'd say, that's the performance, you know, it's, and I think there was a sense of irony, and I guess some of that probably comes from Dada theater, and you know, but it was something, although they were scripted, they were, there was a feeling of improvisation and, you know, and really not, you know, not a script, not anything like that there was some kind of climax, some kind, you know, first scene, second scene, and denouement, to use a French term. So I just want to give you a little background on the prints themselves, and I'm walking right into the camera here.
Right.
So I started printmaking when I was an undergraduate student at Brandeis University, and I was very fortunate to study with a wonderful printmaker, Michael Mazer. And I did a lot of prints, but I was not the printmaker, but the printmaker was sitting right over there, Tana Hochbaum, and she was, you know, just so, she really got the etching media completely, and I always loved to draw. And I remember Michael Mazer had a great attitude towards printmaking. For him, it was a very flexible media, very much like painting, where you know, all drawing based. You'd start drawing, and you make changes, and he'd always tell me, "Throw an aquatint on it," and I would be like, you know, I had no idea really what to do. And there's Sally. So basically, I didn't all those years after Brandeis, I really didn't do any prints. And I became a painter and focused on painting. And fast forward, my son, Michael, my older son, went to University of Connecticut to the art school and became a printmaker. And as he went through the processes, I got really interested in processes, kind of revisited them. And he was doing things I hadn't done, like he was doing color reduction woodcuts. So that was the first show I had at the Bowery Gallery, was color reduction woodcuts. And then one of the perks, and there really aren't too many perks of being chair of a department, you can hire people to teach courses that you can say are for the students, but are to serve one's own interests. And I teach with an artist who unfortunately is not here today because he's teaching, Thomas Edwards, who's an incredible etcher and artist printmaker. And it's kind of like, well, I got him to teach printmaking, I got him to teach etching, and it's been very successful. But he will bring in plates, and he's from Kansas, he's very laid back. He would bring in plates to show the students, and there are, Mark DeNovellis, there are veterans of the Tom Edwards printmaking crew in this audience. He would bring in plates from like the early 70s, and he would say, yeah, you know, I've been working on this plate since '72, and then he said, I think of it as a stage setting today. He'd have all these changes on it, and so that was kind of my prototype for understanding that etching could be, even though you're working on metal, could be very flexible. So I started out. By that time, after my last show, I did start out with the theme of artist parties, and I did some big woodcuts that are not part of this show that were about artist parties. But I got interested in the happenings, and the first prints I did, well, there are a number of prints from fall of 2015 that are not in this show, but the two that I did show from that period is this print, The Audience, and also this print, Necropolis. I think that I refer to the photographs, the period photographs of the happenings by Robert McElroy, and the black and white photographs. And actually, all of the figures are based on real poses of real people in the happenings. I was interested in that because I wanted the specificity and the kind of the mood, the character of the events, and I use that. However, they're figure compositions first and foremost, so really none of the figures, I mean, there might be two figures that were in a photograph together and they're drawn freehand, and then there's the reverse, and then there's changes, etc. But most of the figure compositions are that they're figure compositions, and that I mentioned in my artist statement that the process of pulling the print, of the reverse image, is actually something that works really well with narrative because it allows the artist to connect to their subconscious. So a lot of times the narrative is kind of driven by your subconscious, and although I'm working with a particular theme, a particular time, when I pull the print, a lot of times things are suggested to me, you know, I go with that. And in fact, sometimes surprising things happen, like the print of the threshold. I drew the figure and of the man carrying the woman, and well, I have to say he didn't look like anybody I knew when I was working on the print. But when I pulled the print, I thought, oh my God, it's my Zadie Chaim. That's what the face looked like, and I thought, wow, you know, now I don't know what he's doing carrying this scantily clothed woman, but so sometimes that happens in terms of the reverse print. So all the colored prints are multiple plate prints. Generally, I start with one color, with one print, and you can print it in any color, but I start drawing on the plate. I print it. Sometimes I only draw part, you know, I kind of want the narrative to kind of reveal itself. So I start drawing, I etch it, I print it, and then I see what's happening. Once I make a print of it, if I want to get started on the second plate, I take the print while it's still wet, and I print it over the metal plate that has the hard ground on it, which is a mixture of asphalt and a little bit of mineral spirits. And that will leave the drawing on the plate. Now sometimes, because I use rag paper, sometimes you've got this kind of gloss of this kind of fuzzy stuff on the paper that, you know, so I'm kind of looking like this at the print, but it does work. So the prints, the color prints, are very frequent.
Question, sorry.
Yeah, Josh.
Is your first drawing directly on the plate? You don't draw on a piece of paper first?
That's a great question. I start every print by drawing first, and I don't do anything like transfer anything. I start drawing in a sketchbook. I have an idea. I start to draw, and sometimes I cut a figure out of a drawing and collage it onto another drawing I'm drawing, and those drawings are very loose. They help me to figure out what my ideas are. Then I take the plate and I just dig in, I start drawing with this etching needle, which is a thin metal stylus, you know, that has a point. I was gonna bring it, but I thought something bad might happen on the train. So I draw it on it, and then I etch it in ferrochloric acid, which, you know, you decide how long you're going to etch the plate, then you wash off the ground. But what I'm going to do, I wanted to make this as clear as I could to show you the process. So what I decided to do is focus the talk, give you a kind of overview, but focus the rest of the talk on the triptych, because I think it's a good example for how I work and the kind of changes I make. So I don't know if anybody saw a photograph I posted announcing the talk on Facebook, but some people would know what it was. Tama knew right away that it was a plate with hardware on it, and that I was drawing on it. You could see the silver metal coming through. So that was like I was working on the plates, and I was getting ready to etch them. I'm going to show you. So each panel is made up of 2 plates. In this case, a red plate and a blue plate. I can show you what the very first image is. Sometimes I forget which is okay. So this is the first image. This was the first image that I did from the plate. I started it in the summer of 2016. And I had this idea at the time. I was teaching a landscape drawing class at the Hillstead Museum. So originally I was thinking of the figures in the landscape, but you don't see any trees. But I was thinking about that. I actually had started with that. And so I printed this, and I felt it was already closed up, like it wasn't open. There weren't avenues that I could kind of move the space, that the figures were going to relate to each other. I just didn't think that this figure was going to work. So I began, and okay, so I started with the red plate, so you can't really see that figure anymore. But anyhow, so I scraped it out, but you can see this figure has manifested itself on this plate. It didn't go away, but it went away first, because first I had no idea that I was going to do a triptych. I was just doing this plate. And I guess I thought of it as the 3 Graces from the beginning, but I looked at it and I just thought, you know, it seemed like a good idea, and then you see it and you say, gee, it's really closed up. I really want to open it up. So this is what's called a counterproof, which means you take the print and you run it through the press. I'm very fortunate. I have a big Charles Graham press in my studio, which was originally from the University of Minnesota, but a wonderful guy who rescues equipment, letterpress and presses from institutions, sold it to me through eBay, if you can believe it. 750 pounds of equipment. But anyhow, I print this, and then I put it down on the press bed, I put the paper on top of it, and I run it through, and so then I get the counterproof. And in fact, these are both counterproofs of this plate. So I did that, and then I looked at the woman, and I wanted to get rid of her. So the next print, this is still with 1 plate. So the next, oh, wait a minute, because there's something funny.
Yeah, this one wasn't.
Okay, I think I went to 2 plates. I got rid of the woman who was standing here, who later became this woman. And I opened it up, and I said, oh, it's much better now. And then I put in another figure right over here. And this figure who remained with some changes over there. So, and this is with the 2 plates. So now I started to have the blue plate, and you can see what's going on the the red, oh, it's actually kind of a tawny color. You can also start to see that there's changes because I'm always redrawing, and so later I'm going to start scraping the other plate, etc. That's the next step. And in fact, you can still see, even though it's long been scraped out, you can still see a little ghost of the woman there. Okay, so then after I got to, I decided she had to go. So she was scraped out. Now, I work on 16-ounce copper. And the copper comes from, it doesn't come from an art supply store, it comes from a roofer. And this is also, Tom Edwards connected all of us who do etchings at CCSU with this roofing company. And we get very good deals on copper because it's not as heavy as the copper you might buy at 16 ounces, and it works just great. So these are later. Okay, so then I end up with this, okay? I end up with this. I get rid of the standing lady, but you can still see her a little bit. I actually like the ghost of images. You know, you can do a lot also with printing. I like the presence. So then I decide, you know, I think I wanted to continue. And you notice this is here, like that, but you think this is here, but actually in the plates, because everything's reversed, if you look at the plates, you can do this after I finish talking, if you haven't seen them. But everything is reversed, so the middle stays the same, but this plate with the woman running was actually over here is where I started to, you know, because it's reversed when you're printing. So I decide I'm going to add this plate. So this is, as I continue through working on this, I could, if it was just one color, I could print the 3 plates all together on my press. But with all of what goes on in the plates, all of the kind of color, putting the the plate through the press again, like, you know, sometimes 2, 3, 4 times, I really couldn't do this with more than one color. So this is the 2 plates. I want to see what they look like. I start realizing, I can't remember if I decided she was too small before I started on this plate. But anyhow, I took it. I thought there was just going to be 2 plates. And I had it, you know, I was working on it. And then you start looking at different things. And I can't stop editing myself. So you can see there's like 3 figures back here that are nowhere to be seen in through here. There are more figures in the audience back there. This person is actually smaller than it was. So there's lots of changes. Once I started working on this plate, and okay, this is that's an earlier, this is an earlier image than this is. This is a 1-color plate of the lady running, and you can see this figure no longer exists. The woman's elbow is here. This is based on Jim Dine. There were a number of artists who went on to big careers, but kind of started as friends in the happenings. Jim Dine, Claes Oldenburg, Red Grooms, Lucas Samaras. And there were all kinds of other artists like Bob Thompson, lots and lots of artists who attended. Mary Frank, who attended and participated in the happenings. But there was a wonderful happening that Jim Dine did called vaudeville, and he walked around with these cut out flat shapes of this woman, and so that's one of the flat shapes. He's holding the flat shape. So let's see. So these are all from those first 2 plates. This is a later plate of, oh, thank you. my lovely assistant, Dina Schuster. And so this is the blue and the red plate. You can start to see that as I'm working on it, I'm making changes in the blue, I'm making changes in the red, and then you have to kind of scrape out what you want, what you don't want, and you know, how it's going to work. When you scrape the plate, you're drawing with a skinny little edging stylus. When you scrape the plate, you don't have any ground on it, and I have these scrapers. It's like, you know, you scrape, and then you burnish it. You use a little oil, 3-in-1 oil you put on and you sand it. And I'm not a meticulous scraper because I kind of like to see the history a little bit. And so, but because you're working with metal, everything, you know, is going to take time. So there is a lot of elbow grease involved in it. So this is this is where I'm kind of working out what the sizes are going to look like. Well, I don't know what I was thinking, because you put together this really, really long horizontal, and then that I hadn't planned for. It's kind of adding as I feel like adding to the plate. Then I realized, you know, you're trying to put it together and make it make sense, make the figures relate. And I realized this figure was too small and had to be redrawn. And so I scraped. It took me a long time to scrape. I redrew. And then I also wanted this figure to come over more. I took out the guy that was sitting over here so that the Jim Dime figure could be a little larger, could have a little more impact. And there is still the ghost of a couple figures back here, but I wanted them to be more important, to be less important, and these figures more important. And I also enlarged this figure because as you're seeing it all together, you make adjustments in the space. So let's see what I got here. So then I decided, and you kind of wonder why I would decide this after I had worked so hard on the scraping and the this and the that, and go, I think I need another plate. And so this was the beginning of that. And here's the figure who later became here, but obviously she had to be, in subsequent, scraped out so I could make her larger, you know, because I was looking at how everything looked together, and I needed to make it larger. This is a second state of the one plate, and you can see that there still are two figures here, and I really liked both figures, but I felt like as I wanted to make this figure bigger, I wasn't going to be able to have this figure. This woman was in a lot of the happenings. She was always wearing this Mexican embroidered skirt, and she was always looking like this. And she's actually in the audience print too, but she's kind of like, I thought of her as like the muse. I kind of took her out of the audience, and I was always really interested in her. So she stayed, the other woman, out as I made this figure bigger. So, so here are some other prints as I go along, because you keep making the, you know, you keep printing. Yeah, Dina?
So are the spaces between the figures aqua tinted since there's a solid color, or did you just not wipe the ink away?
There is aqua tint. The aqua tint, now aqua tint...
That's not a confession, that's a good thing.
Yeah, what?
That's not a confession, that's a nice thing.
Yeah. So aqua tint is a fairly recent invention in printmaking. If you look at Rembrandt, there's no aqua tint. It was first begun in the time of Goya, and he was the first person who used aqua tint. And when I was at Brandeis, you can really see the change in materials. We used to pour benzene on our plates to clean them. There was just a lot of stuff we wouldn't do now. But aqua tint, we had this aqua tint box, and some places still have that. Something like this. We would put the plate what you do is you use the hard ground, and like I said, this is one of the plates with hard ground on it. And so what you do is you take a brush and you paint hard ground on the areas that you don't want to be aqua tint. Then I take spray paint and I spray it on. This isn't that healthy either. You spray it on, you get these little dots. And so then once that dries, I wait till the next day, then I etch it. And the part that has little dots will become like a wash drawing. You know, it'll be all one color. So this plate in particular, this print has more aqua tint and actually has aqua tint that's been left in longer or shorter. So you've got the kind of lighter aqua tint here. Probably this was the lightest, and there was probably a darker one, and then there was a darker one yet, you know? So that just means you take the plate out, you put more hard ground on it, and you let that dry, and then you put it back in the acid. So if you look at these plates, you can see where the aqua tint is, because you see how it kind of looks like little dots? That's where the aqua tint is. And this print actually has only a tiny bit of aqua tint. This is a little different because the two plates, what I'm doing here is it's all about drawing. So I have the blue plate and the red plate, and it's kind of a cerulean blue and kind of a rose color. And by the overlapping of the marks, I get more color. Like it looks like there's actually a different color here because of the rose and the blue matching it, overlapping, and sometimes you might think there's some black in there, but there isn't. So this is a little different than a plate like this, than a print like this that uses aqua tint quite a bit. But as you look at these plates, you can see where the aqua tint is here. And I also wanted to show you, this is what a plate looks like when I'm ready to draw on it. So you see, you can see the drawing through the plate. But it's not 100%, like it's not lit up in lights, right? I mean, you're kind of looking at, yeah, you can see it. And that's what I draw over. And so you use a combination of the plate, and you also use your prints, your counterproofs, so that you can see exactly what it looks like on the plate. And then there's an element of, you know, gee, I didn't realize that was gonna overlap the blue plate as much as it did. I gotta scrape this out, etc. So it's kind of a fluid process. All of these are here. These are all the blue plates. These are all the red plates. These are a few other different prints that are really towards the finished part, and then I'm going to just talk about the actual printing of this. So, you know, this is one, and there actually were two different aqua tints on the flower. There was also, which you can see here, like in the blue, there was actually, and it's overlapping the red, so it comes out real dark. But so I could print it like this, but I actually preferred to only print it in red. So, you know, once you get the two plates going, when you print, I mean, you can make all kinds of different changes. I mean, in a way, the prints are all monotypes. So these are basically different variations on the theme, you know, the single plates. I had to print them as single plates because they were so complex, put through the press so many times that I just couldn't do it all together. It would have been.
Do you have to wet the paper each time you?
Well, what I do is I have a clawfoot bathtub, and I fill it up with water, and I have the paper in it. And I take it out of, when I ink up both plates. And then I take the paper out, I put it under the mat, the blotters, and I, you know, use my old rolling pin, and I blot it, and then I put it through the press, and that soaking of the water allows me to pretty much keep printing going through many times, but again, I'm only dealing with one plate at once. So this is another one, and I wanted to talk about some of the lace in some of the paintings, like the lace here, the lace here, the lace here, and also the pattern, which is also lace here. So as I'm printing this, as I get towards the end, and I'm really working with making the print the way I want it to be, the finished print, there are artists that print editions, you know, that have a plate, and it's usually, I would say, it could be a couple of colors, but basically every print is supposed to look the same. That's not who I am. I'm not interested in that. So each print really looks different. What I did in printing this print took me 2 9-hour days just to print it. And this is after all the drawings done, etc. And I started out with the middle plate as a, you know, because everything kind of emanates out of that. Now, there were choices I made in inking it up. Oh, I wanted to talk a little bit about inking up the plate to people that are unfamiliar with what an intaglio process means. A relief print, like a wood cut or a linoleum cut, a lino cut, is that whatever you cut away doesn't print. And what you leave is what's going to print. But with an intaglio plate, it's the opposite. What happens is, as you draw on it, as you have the hard ground and you put it in the acid with all the kind of copper exposed with the drawing, where you draw gets eaten away by the acid. And so then you have your plate, and you take etching ink, you put it on the palette, you kind of mix it. If you're going to mix other color in it, you might put a little bit of plate oil in it so that it's going to be very smooth as you put it out on the plate. And you use these little cut up cardboard pieces, and you wipe it on the plate, and you kind of wipe it off, and then you take tarletans, which are cheesecloth. And my son has told me that you have to do the dirty diaper method of wiping it. You take a cheesecloth that's got to be kind of really thick, you know, kind of all bundled up, and you just kind of wipe it like that. And then pretty soon I take, with gloves, I take a piece of paper from a telephone book, and I start to rub the plate like this, and it takes a while. And then what you see is that you see the copper, but the ink is stuck in those grooves. So when you run it through the press with the damp paper, that ink comes off. Now, because I'm running through this through the press so many times, the first thing I do is I put the paper down on the press, and you put the plate on top of it. Now there's a lot of discussion about, oh, it's better to have the paper on the press and to put the plate on top of it, but it's not really doable if you're going to use a couple of plates and you're going to keep running it through. So each one of these plates has, so the first printing of the red and the blue is just going to have the kind of rust red color, which has been rubbed into the plate, wiped off, remains. You know, it's going to stay in the aqua tint area like it's like a solid color. And I run that through, and then I have the paper on the plate bed, and I take the blue plate like this, and I go like this, and I put it down. Sometimes I have to go like this a little bit to make it fit, but then I run it through again. And then I look at it, and then I decide, well, I think I want this area to be a little darker. I think I want to bring out the blues there. So I'll probably ink up part of the plate again. And I also will decide maybe to use my roller, like a roller that you might use for a woodcut, to decide, like there's no yellow plate. I might say, okay, I want the dress to be yellow. I roll some yellow on it. And then I print it again, and I would say each part of the plate is probably, each plate is run through at least twice. Now the pattern is, you could possibly print it into the plate. Like you could use a soft ground and impress the a design like lace into the soft ground, and then you could etch it and you could use it like that. But actually, every time you see a pattern like over here in the purple and green print, in the lace dress over here, what it is I take underwear of mine that has lace and I cut it up and I put it on the, it's true, this is tell-all, you know, I put it on the, let's say this is on the bed of the press, and I place it on the, not on the plate, but on the print, which is down here. Then I put the plate on top of it, run it through again, and what happens is, the first time I did it, I thought that the design was going to be on the paper, but it's not. It actually is on the plate itself. So then you remove the lace and you run it through again. And so in a few places you can actually see, like over here, you can see a little bit of what happened when in the copper. If I kept, you won't really see that in the print. I could print it again, you wouldn't see it, but I can tell what that's from. So this is a roll of color. This is a roll of color, the yellow. This we know is underwear. And there you have it. Yeah.
So do you ink up the lace?
No, I roll the color on the plate, and then I place the lace on top of it.
So then you save the lace because then it becomes like a... You can actually save it.
I use it a couple of times, then I throw it away. Yeah. I figure it's lived a long life. So I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah.
I just have so much to say, but I'll limit it. Your process of the whole reversal thing.
Mm-hmm.
So do you make the drawing on the plate from the drawing in your sketchbook, or do you reverse it first and then do the reverse drawing on the plate? So
I never reverse it. I just start
so
drawing.
What comes out for you is the reverse of what you...
Yeah, and whatever I've drawn carefully, you know, or kind of loosely, whatever I've worked out, when I start drawing the plate, I think it comes from being a painter first. Yeah. It's like I am constantly changing my mind.
Sure are. And your process, your process is so painterly, and Susan was saying it, the prints are so painterly, but the way that you're working in metal and just like scraping out, and it's a cute process to do that, but yeah, that seems so organic and so informed by your, the way that you paint.
I was telling Tom Edwards that I would scrape the plate a lot, you know, oh my God, and I was describing how in this print, this figure was much smaller, and she was kind of in the same space as these two other figures, but I really wanted her to be in the foreground. So I scraped it out. You have to scrape it out on both plates. And I just remember I was working on it, I brought it in, and I had the print, and I was saying to a student in the printmaking class, it was just her and I in the printmaking room and studio, and I said, oh yeah, I decided she was too small, so I'm just scraping her out, and she saw it like half done. I will never forget the look of horror in her face. It's like most students do not want to make these big changes. You know, they just don't. They want to work harder on it. They want to keep working on it, but they want to kind of control it. They want to trace the image on, and you know, that's not something I want to do. Yeah. Yeah, Josh. Yeah.
So I'm gonna sound like an idiot, but
You're my cousin. You're a tame, handsome. That's not possible.
Does that mean you're all it is?
No, brilliant.
So, etching the plate to me sounds like a pretty permanent thing. So when you're saying you're making these changes, you're taking this figure out, you're making this figure bigger, does that mean you've got to use new plates each time, or you just keep using the one plate and making the change on the one plate?
You make the
times?
change, you take the scraper and you scrape the metal off, you sand it, you know, and if I was, I actually like some of the ghosts, so if I print it and I need to take more off, I do, but it's not that big a deal. I mean, it might take me, like 3 hours, you know, scraping and and doing the sandpaper and stuff like that, and then I print it again, I go to the other plate, and, you know, but,
Wait, the other plate, so how many plates are we talking about?
each plate, there are 6 plates that made up this. Each panel is 2 plates. There's a red plate and a blue plate. So sometimes there might be a figure on one plate that's not on the other.
So you'll
but
never do more than 2
usually,
plates?
you could use more. You could use more, but I found that 2 plates is, I mean, you could use 3 plates. You could do so much with different plates. Like you could have, a lot of times people talk about the key plate that's going to have more of the drawing on it. You could make the other ones just be aquatint. I mean, I'm describing a process that a lot of printmakers might not follow. You know, they might be very organized, they might start with a drawing, and then the making of the print is an exercise in follow through, and they're, you know, amazing technicians, and that's not the way I work, you know. I work in a, you know, I think that, you know, the same way I work with painting, but of course with painting you take a big brush. The one thing that's great though about the prints is that you have the record. You know, so sometimes I'll look, oh, I got rid of that figure, you know, maybe, I don't know, yeah. Cassandra.
But with the woodcut reductions though, you don't have anything left. And did you find the woodcut to be a little restrictive and not allow the flexibility of the etching? Is that why you moved to the copper plate and got away from the...
Well, the woodcut, you're right. When you cut something away, you have to live with it.
Right.
You know, some people actually say, oh, I use filler and I, you know, put this in, and, you know, but I don't work like that. But the thing about the woodcut is you have to commit to something. So a lot of people don't like etching because it remains a kind of open process, you know, because you can keep making changes. The more I work with etching and color etching, the more I do that. You know, the more changes I make and the more I love the process. So I've got many, many ideas for more prints to do. But when I did the woodcuts, I did a drawing on the big woodcut, the big piece of wood, and I did not change it. You know, I mean, sometimes there'd be a big area and I might add a figure to it, you know, but basically I committed to where the figures were, and then I had no idea what the color was going to be like, but you kind of can control it because you start out, I'm just going to remove the lightest, and then I'm just going to remove the next color, and then I'm just going to, you know, you kind of can do it gradually, but you're absolutely right. Once you cut it, you got to live with it. It's, you know, and that's not the case with etching. Yeah, Mark.
Can you explain how you repeat the figure after you scrape out both plates and you're redrawing and resizing it? Are you using are you doing the drawing on a piece of paper or something, and then how are you matching it on both?
Well, what I do is I redraw it on one, and then if I really wanted to see what it looks like, I would go through putting hard ground on the other plate and printing the print on the plate, on the hard ground.
Could you describe that again, how you transfer your drawing from one plate and match it up with the other?
Yeah, so let's say this is my ground plate. You know, has the ground on it, okay? And I've gotten rid of, I've made this figure much larger here. So I would make a print of this, and then I take the print, and let's say I print that on this. With a little imagination. Then I put this down on, and it's wet, and I put this down on the bed of the press, and then I go like this, and I run it through, and that image is going to be printed onto the plate. So I can see it, you know, on the hard ground. And a lot of people recommend, I usually use whatever color but I think it's I'd probably have better luck if I didn't use a really soft rag paper. If I used a kind of slicker, not so good quality paper, I think I wouldn't get the pulp sticking to the plate. Susan, yeah.
Was it hard to go from being a painter where you have an idea, you dip the brush in the paint and you do it and you see the results of your idea, where here, it seems like you have to wait for a long time before you see the results of your idea.
You know, I think I like that. I think I like it. I think I like building it up and contemplating it and working on it and then seeing, you know, and seeing the history. I love to draw, and the etching is all about drawing. So I think I love that, and I think there's something about printmaking that really lends itself to narrative. And I mean, it's certainly been used for narrative, but I find it's easier for me to connect to the narrative. And I think, you know, it's kind of funny because I'm not a real detail-oriented person. You know, I'm kind of big picture rather than, but there's part of me that loves like really complicated knitting patterns, you know, complicated cooking, you know, recipes. And I think it kind of connects with that element that's like, it's kind of big picture and broad. Obviously, I'm not real, you know, technique-y or pretty, as my son says. But I just think the whole process of there being like this thing and this thing and that thing to do, I really love the process. I love the fact that it takes time. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah, Dina.
You know how material, the idea can come out of the material, and the material can dictate how you actually use a line, how you actually make the image. How has the intaglio, how have your lines or creating form changed from intaglio, from the woodcut to intaglio, since one is a much different tool? So how has the quality of your drawing changed in those two materials?
Well, one thing that I like about the etching is that with the intaglio, because with the woodcut, because I was, you know, with a color reduction woodcut, you make all the prints at once, so you make print 20, and it's just one color, and then you add another color, then you print the whole thing again, you keep adding it and adding it. And what I find is that sometimes all of the marks that you make with the different kinds of tools, there's a huge variety, because you can use chisels, you can use a billion different things, you know, to make the drawing. But sometimes what happens is, as you keep printing it over and over again, you get some of the marks that you don't want in areas you've cut away. You know, you get this kind of, and I feel like with etching, you have, of course, it's a completely different line. You know, so I do, because I love to draw, I love drawing with different materials, you know, but I do think there's something about the etching and the kind of line that there is that is just unique. But one thing I do notice is when I first, some people do such beautiful etchings with with one state, it's just, you know, it's all line, it's just beautiful. I find that what gives the plate a particular kind of light is, you know, I'm just going back to my first, the first plate, and you know, you look at it, it's like so flat, you know? I mean, it's just for me to see what it looks like. But I find when you start working the plate, when you start scraping it, and you get a very different kind of light. So I remember, like, you know, in terms of making something look three-dimensional, I found I did a lot of scraping over here, you know, and I find that you get a much more three-dimensional form and a different kind of light when you actually scrape into it, scrape into the plate. So I think the scraping actually, you know, really does a lot to the plate and to the print. Yeah.
So you're saying that this figure turned out to be, after you pulled it, you're saying?
His face, yeah.
Yeah.
I said, Sadie Chaim, I thought you were going to be at a political meeting. What are you doing, you know, carrying this woman?
So I'm just curious about some of the faces, like the fella in this print seems very specific. Is that somebody in particular, or?
It's not, but again, it looks like somebody who's a very good friend of my father's who taught music at Brandeis. It looks like Irving Fine, who was a composer. I pulled the print and I go, that looks like my father's old friend, Irving Fine.
It looks like that a little bit too, I thought. I thought that it looked like your father a little bit. But,
yeah, it looks like Irving Fine. Yeah.
So was this whole process first invented so that people could just make copies of existing work, or was it always an organic, original method to make new things? Does that make sense, that question? Because I always think of prints as, oh, you got a big painting, you want to make a copy of it, you print it. And so that's why.
Well, it depends what kind of print it is. Like any kind of, you could make a photographic copy, but if you go back to Rembrandt and you look at Rembrandt etchings, they are a thing in themselves. You know, Dürer, those are all things in themselves. Although I do think it was a way, like with the expressionists, the German expressionists, it definitely was a way to get their ideas out to the public because it was less expensive, and you know. But there's centuries and centuries of the printmaking process being about its own thing. Although there might be a painting and then an etching that's based in the painting, you know. But I think there are, you know, let's say you take somebody like Morandi, who did those wonderful still life etchings, and he did wonderful paintings of the same subject matter, but they're very different one from the other, even if there's a painting version of the other, you know. So I would say there could be a print that was a way for people to be able to buy something at a much less expensive price than the painting. The painting was only one, you know. And sometimes there were many whole editions, many prints of a particular plate, and people will look for an early impression. They don't want a later impression. It's not worth as much, you know.